They always told me I was supposed to be enough, but deep down I think I always knew I wasn't. The truth is, I was never the child my parents wanted, and no matter how hard I tried, there was always this shadow hanging over me, something unsaid, but impossible to ignore. It all started with one photograph I wasn't supposed to see. I was digging through the attic one summer, trying to find an old toy, when I opened a box marked with my mother's handwriting. Inside were baby clothes, neatly folded, delicate lace dresses and tiny shoes that couldn't possibly have been mine. There was a photograph tucked in between, faded but still clear enough. A little girl with my mother's smile and my father's eyes. I froze because she looked so much like me, but softer, like a version of me that had been allowed to exist in another life. I carried the photo down to my mom, thinking maybe she'd laugh and explain, but instead she snatched it out of my hands so quickly it felt like I had uncovered a crime. Her lips pressed tight, her hands trembling. She told me never to go into that box again. That night I overheard them arguing in the kitchen, whispers that cut sharper than screams. My father's voice broke through, "He'll never replace her." My mother hissed back, "We don't have a choice. He's all we have left." Those words wrapped around me like chains. I lay awake in the dark, wondering who she was, the girl in the picture, and why I was being compared to her. That's where the cracks in my identity began to spread. For weeks, the photograph haunted me, until one day my mother came into my room holding something in her arms. It was a dress, pale yellow, with a bow at the back. She said softly, "Just try it. For me." I stared at her, stunned, my mouth dry. I was too young to say no, too desperate for approval, so I slipped it on. She smiled for the first time in what felt like forever, her eyes watering as she whispered, "You look just like her." In that moment, I understood. I was wearing the memory of a child they had lost. I wasn't me anymore. I was a replacement. But instead of pulling away, I stayed. Because that smile. I hadn't seen it in so long, and I craved it. My father didn't smile. He looked at me with that mix of guilt and anger I could never decode. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was always short, sharp, and final. "Don't confuse him," he told my mother. But she kept at it. Every day after school, she'd lay something out on my bed: skirts, blouses, little barrette for my hair. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it became routine. I thought it was harmless, just a way to keep her from breaking. I didn't realize what it was doing to me until later. At school I was still myself, or at least the version I thought I was supposed to be. But inside the house, the rules were different. Inside, I became someone else entirely. My mother started calling me by another name, the name from the photograph, the name of the girl who wasn't there anymore. I answered to it because the more I did, the softer her eyes grew, the more alive she looked. I wanted to resist, but I also wanted her love, and if this was the price, I was willing to pay it. The double life gnawed at me. I'd sit in class trying to focus, but all I could think about was whether the braid my mom had taught me to do in my hair would still leave a mark, whether anyone would notice the faint scent of her perfume that clung to me after she kissed my forehead goodbye. I told myself it was temporary, that one day she would stop needing me to be someone else. But she never stopped. Instead, she grew bolder. The turning point came when we were invited to a family wedding. My mother insisted I wear a dress. I fought her. I begged her. But her voice cracked when she said, "Please, just this once, for me." Against my will, against my terror, I gave in. At the wedding, distant relatives cooed and smiled, telling my mother how beautiful her daughter was, how much she had grown. My father stood stiff, jaw locked, unable to correct them. I wanted the ground to swallow me, but my mother's hand squeezed mine with such fierce gratitude that I stayed silent. That night, back at home, I cried into my pillow until I couldn't breathe, but in the morning, she brought me breakfast in bed and called me her angel. I was trapped in a prison built out of her love. The older I grew, the harder it became to separate myself from the role she had cast me in. Sometimes I'd look in the mirror and not recognize who was staring back. Was it me? Was it her? Or was it the girl in the photograph, haunting us both? I kept my secret life hidden, terrified of anyone finding out. But secrets have a way of unraveling. It happened one afternoon when my best friend came over unannounced. My mother, in her usual ritual, had dressed me up and was fussing with my hair when the doorbell rang. I panicked. Before I could change, my friend walked in. He froze, confusion flashing across his face. I thought he would laugh or mock me, but instead he just stared, and finally whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" Shame burned through me. I pushed him out, yelling, swearing never to talk about it again. But the damage was done. He knew. And soon others would too. Rumors spread like wildfire in school. Snickers in the hallway, mocking voices behind my back. My father grew more distant, retreating into silence, while my mother doubled down, insisting that this was who I truly was. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was this me? Or was I just living a lie built on grief? At night I'd lie awake, torn apart by questions I couldn't answer. Who was I? A son? A daughter? A ghost? A replacement? My identity felt like a mask glued to my face, impossible to peel off without breaking everything underneath. Then came the night of confrontation. My father finally snapped. He cornered my mother and shouted that she was destroying me, that I was losing myself. She broke down, sobbing, clinging to me, begging me not to leave her like the first one had. That's when the truth spilled out. The girl in the photograph wasn't just some distant cousin. She was my sister. My twin. The one who hadn't survived. And me. I was the shadow left behind. My mother's grief had never healed, so she tried to resurrect her through me. My father had gone along with it out of fear of losing her too, but he knew it was crushing me. I stood there, my world collapsing, every piece of my childhood reframing itself in a new, harsher light. I wasn't just playing dress-up. I was filling a grave. I wish I could say I broke free right then. But life doesn't work like that. Part of me still clung to it, still felt responsible for her happiness. How could I stop when I knew it was the only thing keeping her afloat? And yet, each day it chipped away at me, until one morning I looked in the mirror and realized I didn't know who was staring back. Was it me? Was it her? Or was it someone new entirely? I whispered the name my mother called me, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a mask. It felt like, maybe it was mine too. That terrified me more than anything. Now, looking back, I can't tell you if I became her because I wanted to or because I had no choice. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe identity isn't about choosing, but surviving. What I know is this: I lived my life as a replacement for love, as the child they wanted but lost, and somewhere along the way, I became something else. Not just a shadow, not just a memory, but someone new. Someone both of them and neither of them. And whether that's a tragedy or a triumph, I'll let you decide. All I know is, it's my truth. And I'm still living it. After that night, the house felt like a battlefield where no one dared fire the first shot. My mother tiptoed around me, speaking in soft tones, offering me clothes as if she were afraid I'd reject them and with them, reject her. My father became a ghost, his footsteps heavy but his words nearly gone, except for the occasional warning glance that told me he didn't trust what was happening to me. I was caught between their expectations like a rope pulled tight, stretching me thinner every day. At school, the whispers had sharpened into knives. People no longer asked if the rumors were true, they just assumed. My locker was plastered one morning with notes scrawled in thick marker: pretender, freak, doll boy. I tore them down with shaking hands, stuffing them deep into my bag so no one could see me cry, but I could never stuff away the fear that followed me everywhere. I kept thinking if I confessed, if I told the truth, maybe people would understand. But what truth could I tell? That I was living a life meant for someone else? That I didn't know if the person in the mirror was my reflection or a ghost's? It was my best friend who tried to reach me again. He cornered me after class, eyes filled not with mockery but with worry. "You don't have to pretend for them," he whispered. "You can just be you." But I didn't know what me meant anymore. I pushed him away, snapping at him until his face hardened and he stopped trying. That hurt more than the laughter in the halls, losing the one person who might have understood. Then something happened I didn't expect. My father, the man who had avoided me for months, walked into my room one evening while I was sitting there in silence, wearing one of the dresses my mother insisted on. I braced myself for anger, but he just sat down across from me, his hands folded tightly. He looked at me for a long time, and finally he said, "You remind me of her too. But you're not her. You're you. Don't let us steal that from you." For a moment, I almost believed him. But then my mother called from the kitchen, using the other name, and the spell shattered. I followed her voice, because love, even when it hurts, is harder to resist than logic. The months bled into years, and the performance deepened. My mother wasn't content with just clothes anymore. She wanted mannerisms, habits, the way I spoke and walked. She coached me, corrected me, shaped me. And the strangest part is, I started to internalize it. The lines blurred so much that sometimes I'd slip in public, answering with the wrong name or adjusting my hair the way she had taught me. Those slips brought stares, confusion, sometimes even cruelty, but they also brought a strange relief, as if part of me was finally showing. Was it still pretending if it started to feel natural? Or had the act become reality? I didn't know anymore. One night I was rummaging through my desk drawer when I found a letter folded neatly, hidden under my schoolbooks. It was in my mother's handwriting, addressed to the daughter she had lost. My hands shook as I opened it. She wrote about how much she missed her, how she saw glimpses of her in me every day, how dressing me up made her feel like she hadn't lost everything. But near the end, she confessed something else. She wrote, "I know he's not you, but sometimes I think he could be. And if he can't, then maybe he'll become someone even better." Reading that, I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Was I just a vessel for her grief? Or had I truly become something she saw as real? I tried to tell myself I could endure it, that one day I'd leave, and then I could strip away the layers and find myself again. But life doesn't pause for healing. It pushes you forward, even when you're not ready. When college acceptance letters came, my mother wept not because she was proud, but because she was terrified of losing me. "Promise me you won't stop," she begged. "Promise me you'll stay my girl." My father stood in the doorway, silent, his face unreadable. "And me?" I said yes. Because I couldn't bear to break her heart again. So I went off to college with a double identity packed in my suitcase. On campus, I tried to reinvent myself, to blend in, to act like the version of me everyone expected. But the truth has a way of clawing through. There were nights when I'd sit alone in my dorm, pulling out the clothes my mother had given me, slipping them on, not because she asked but because part of me needed it. That realization was terrifying. It wasn't just her anymore. It was me. Maybe it had always been me. The first time I walked out in public dressed that way by choice, my heart raced so hard I thought it would tear through my chest. No one stopped me, no one pointed, no one cared. That small taste of freedom was intoxicating, and for the first time, I wondered if my mother's obsession had planted something inside me that was now blooming on its own. I wasn't just pretending anymore. I was exploring. I was becoming. But even as I stepped into this new sense of self, I couldn't escape the shadow of being a replacement. Every time I looked in the mirror, I asked myself, do I like this because it's me, or because it's her? Am I honoring myself, or just feeding a ghost? That question still gnaws at me, and maybe it always will. But here's what I know, I survived. I carried the weight of being the child they wanted, even when it nearly broke me, and I came out of it with scars, yes, but also with courage. Courage to ask who I really am, even if the answer is complicated. Courage to live, not as a replacement, but as someone entirely new. And maybe that's the twist no one expected, not my father, not my mother, not even me. They thought they were shaping me into a memory, but instead, they gave me the tools to become something else. Someone stronger. Someone real. So if you're asking me now who I am, I can only tell you this. I am not the shadow of a sister, nor the puppet of grief. I am the product of pain, of love twisted into something unrecognizable, of secrets and survival. I am both the child they wanted and the person I chose to be. And for the first time, I'm starting to think that's enough. Years passed, and distance did what time alone couldn't. Being away from home gave me space to breathe, to exist outside the suffocating expectations. But it didn't erase the scars. Every phone call from my mother was a tug back into the past. She never stopped using the other name, never stopped asking what I was wearing, never stopped reminding me who she thought I was supposed to be. I played along most of the time, out of guilt, out of habit, out of fear of shattering her completely. My father called only rarely, and when he did, it was always practical, emotionless questions. Do you need money? How are your classes? But behind his clipped words, I could hear something else, like he wanted to say more but couldn't bring himself to. By the time I graduated, I thought I had figured out who I was, or at least who I was becoming. I had built a life for myself, fragile but mine, where I could explore my identity on my own terms. But then came the phone call that pulled me right back into the storm. My mother's voice was trembling. My father was in the hospital. A heart attack. Serious. She begged me to come home. The moment I walked into that sterile hospital room and saw him lying there, pale and frail, something inside me cracked. He looked at me, eyes heavy with years of silence, and whispered, "Don't waste yourself." Then he closed his eyes. That was the last thing he ever said to me. The funeral was a blur of black suits, hushed condolences, and the suffocating presence of family I hadn't seen in years. Whispers followed me wherever I went. Some relatives still remembered me as the daughter from that wedding years ago. Others looked at me with confusion, trying to piece together how I fit into the puzzle of grief. My mother clung to me as if I were her lifeline, and once again I found myself slipping back into the role she needed, because the alternative was watching her drown. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the scared child anymore. I was older now, heavier with experience, and the weight of pretending pressed harder against me than ever before. One night, after the house emptied of visitors, I sat across from her at the kitchen table. The same table where years ago I had overheard the argument that changed everything. I looked at her, really looked at her, her tired eyes, her fragile hands, the way she avoided my father's empty chair. And I said, quietly but firmly, "I can't keep being her for you." For a moment, I thought she would break, that she would shatter into pieces right there. Her hands trembled, and tears welled up, but then she did something I didn't expect. She nodded. She said, "I know." That admission hit me harder than all the years of denial. She knew. She had always known. And still she had kept going, not because she thought it was right, but because she couldn't let go. She confessed through tears that she saw both of us every time she looked at me, that it tore her apart but also kept her alive. She begged me not to hate her. And the truth is, I didn't. I couldn't. I was angry, yes, and hurt, but underneath it all was the understanding that her obsession came from a love so fierce it warped her, and in turn, warped me. In the weeks after the funeral, I stayed with her, helping her through the grief, this time not as a replacement but as myself. Slowly, painfully, I began using my own name in conversations, correcting her when she slipped. Sometimes she caught herself, sometimes she didn't, but each time I stood my ground, and each time she seemed to accept it a little more. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was progress. Now, looking back, I realize the story of my life has never been simple. It has been about shadows and ghosts, about being molded into someone else's dream, about fighting for the right to exist as myself. It's about how love, when twisted by grief, can become a chain, and how breaking free doesn't mean destroying the bond but reshaping it. My mother still calls me sometimes and slips into old habits, but I don't feel the same panic anymore. I correct her gently, and she tries again. She's learning, just like I am. And me. I've stopped asking whether I became who I am because of her or despite her. Maybe it's both. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I'm here, alive, standing on the other side of years of confusion and pain, and I can finally say this: I am not a replacement. I am not a ghost. I am not the child they lost. I am the person I chose to become. And if it took walking through their grief, carrying their impossible expectations, and unraveling every thread of my identity to get here, then maybe that was the journey I was always meant to take. So when people ask me who I am, I tell them the truth. I am the child they wanted, the child they lost, and the person I finally claimed for myself. All of it. Every contradiction, every scar, every piece. Because in the end, I've learned that identity isn't about replacing someone else's love. It's about building your own. Time has a strange way of softening things you once thought would never heal. The years after my father's death blurred into routines of work, survival, and the occasional strained call from my mother. At first, I braced myself for each ring of the phone, terrified of being pulled back into that old role. But slowly, her voice on the other end became less demanding, less insistent. Maybe she was tired, maybe she was finally learning to let go, or maybe she was just afraid of losing me the way she had lost everything else. Whatever the reason, something between us began to shift. I built a life of my own. I carved out space where I could exist without explanation, where I could decide who I wanted to be without the constant shadow of her grief. I found friends who didn't care about labels, who saw me not as a ghost or a replacement but as someone real, someone alive. And yet, no matter how far I went, there was always a thread tying me back to her. I told myself I could cut it, that I should cut it, but I never did. Love, even twisted, doesn't break that easily. It was years later, when I was older than she had ever expected me to be, that I got the call that brought everything full circle. She was sick. The kind of sickness that leaves no bargaining, no time to argue, only time to face the truth. I went back home, the house smaller than I remembered, the walls heavy with silence. She was in her bedroom, frail and pale, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything unsaid hung in the air. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." 2 words I never thought I'd hear. "I should have loved you as you were," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I tried to hold on to her through you, and I know I hurt you. I know I stole pieces of you I had no right to." Hearing that, I felt something break inside me, but it wasn't anger, it was release. For the first time, she wasn't asking me to be anyone else. She was seeing me. Just me. I told her I forgave her, though forgiveness isn't a single act, it's something you practice every day, especially with the people who shaped you the most. I told her I understood, even if I would never fully forget. And I told her something else too, that in her desperate attempt to resurrect the past, she had accidentally helped me discover a future I never would have found otherwise. That I had built an identity from the fragments she gave me, one that was mine, not hers, not my sister's, but mine. She smiled faintly, her grip weak but steady, and for once she called me by the name I had chosen for myself. In that moment, I felt the chains of years of confusion loosen. I wasn't just a replacement anymore. I wasn't just a vessel for her grief. I was a person, whole and flawed and real, standing in front of her with my own name, my own truth. Not long after, she was gone. The house emptied, the silence heavier than ever. I walked through each room, finding remnants of the life we had shared, dresses folded away, photographs faded with time, letters never sent. I gathered them, not to bury them, but to keep them. Because even though they carried pain, they also carried the story of how I became who I am. And I realized something important then: being a replacement had never truly defined me. Surviving it had. Now, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see a ghost. I no longer wonder if I'm just wearing someone else's skin. I see myself shaped by love and loss, by secrets and survival, by courage I didn't know I had. I see someone who walked through the fire of being the child they wanted and came out not burned to ashes but transformed. And that's why I tell this story. Not because it's easy, not because it's neat, but because it's real. Because maybe there's someone out there who feels like a replacement too, who feels like they can never live up to what others wanted them to be. To them, I say this: you don't have to carry their grief forever. You can become someone else, someone new, someone free, someone who belongs only to themselves. That's what I became. Not a copy, not a shadow, not a replacement. Just me. Finally, me.